So as a follow-up to my last video on the M16A4, I made the cardinal sin of not talking about a crucial part of that clone, the Trijicon ACOG. And so we're going to talk about that today. I did before why you should consider the M16, and then now we're going to do why you should consider the Trijicon ACOG. For some context, I've had this ACOG for about 2 years now or so, and so I paid full price for it for myself from Aero Optic. They tend to have good deals, by the way. And so that's kind of my background. There's no one sent it to me or anything. And so the capacity I've been using it for is really just kind of weekend range trips to get better at shooting. And so far, the farthest I've taken it out to is 200 yards, but it is entirely doable to take it out even farther. I just don't have access to that kind of range yet. So a little bit about the ACOG. I think if you're watching this video, you probably already know a lot about it, or at least you're familiar with it. But the ACOG is, a fixed 4-power magnification scope that has been used by the US military for so long. Some of the common things that people like about it is the durability, the glass clarity, the field of view. I personally have really liked using the scope beyond just the kind of cool aesthetics and, the cloning thing. I think it is a very practical and a very useful optic to have today. This specific one that we're going to talk about today is the TA31 RCO-A4CP, which is basically, the bullet drop compensator. The reticle has been calibrated for the 20-inch barrel, which is what I have on my M16A4 club. So one of the biggest reasons you should consider the ACOG is because of its construction. It makes it very durable and very reliable. No matter what you're buying for your rifle, whether it's a scope like we're talking about today, or if you're looking at any other kind of attachment or piece for your guns, pistol or rifle or whatever, it needs to be durable and it needs to last, and it needs to be well thought out and designed. I would argue that the ACOG checks all these boxes, but let's talk first about its construction. First off, it's made of very durable material, so as long as you're treating your optic properly, or maybe even if you're, a little using and abusing it, you can trust this thing to last and not just be so fragile that you need baby your rifle and all that kind of stuff. It's a scope that's going to last you, and then it's going to work well, and it's tough as well. I think this is very evident by its long service record in our military, being used in many different environments for very long periods of time. And so the service record speaks to that more than what I can do as well. So again, no matter what optic you're choosing, I strongly encourage that durability is high on your priority list. You don't want something fragile, again, for very obvious reasons, and so this already makes this ACOG stand out. The field of view is very forgiving. I feel like when I look down the scope, I can see so much of what's around me, and I don't have any kind of tunnel vision or feel claustrophobic in my, in my eyes when I'm looking through the scope, and I have a good understanding of what's around me, my surroundings and all of that. So it's not like you're sacrificing any kind of thing, in my opinion, when looking down the sights of the scope. At least sacrifice for the sake of a scope, or of course just by the fact that you're looking at something magnified. Yes, that's going to be a little less forgiving than an unmagnified optic. And I find that is a very forgiving or a very generous field of view that you can look through and be very aware of your surroundings. I was pleasantly surprised by that. Not only is the field of view great, but also the glass clarity is exceptional. You definitely don't want to have any optic where it's very hazy, or there's a lot of discoloration, or just everything looks warped and fisheyed around the perimeter of the glass. And so this is definitely nothing that I've experienced with the ACOG. It's always been very crisp and very clear. And even after about 2 years of having it, I always still am impressed by how when I look down the sights of the optics, I always have a very sharp and good natural looking eye box, or natural looking field of view. I would also argue that because it is a fixed 4-power scope, there's fewer moving parts like an LPBO or an MPBO. That also adds to the durability. Fewer parts being in there means fewer points of possible failure too. So the construction of the optic is definitely a big selling point and is reason number one. But a second reason you may consider the ACOG too is because of its relative ease to learn. As I mentioned, just moments ago, this was my first scope, and so I thought there would be a huge learning curve to using something like this versus like a red dot or just using iron sights. And to a degree, there definitely was a learning curve. You do have to be willing to put in the effort to be able to adapt to a magnified optic, but at the end of the day, I found that it was actually not nearly as difficult to use this ACOG as I thought it would be. My understanding is that the ACOG was also designed to be simple. It's not necessarily a precision or a super accurate scope. It's for acceptable levels of accuracy. And because of this trade-off, which I don't think is bad at all, I found it to be actually quite easy to pick up and to be used. The reticle, you know, the chevron reticle was initially not something that I gravitated towards, which this ACOG has, but just after several hundred rounds downrange, I got quite used to it, and now it's just very intuitive to me, to the point where when I finally got an MPVO, so another optic, I actually chose to get the chevron as well. And so to me, about 1,000 rounds downrange is actually not that many, you know, over a period of time as you get acclimated to it. And so I am a firm believer that using this ACOG is actually, you know, pretty simple to do, as long as you're willing to put in the time and effort to get your fundamentals down and you consistently practice, just like on any other type of feature on a gun. Now, keep in mind, as I said earlier in this video, I've only shot out to about 200 yards. So admittedly, that is not the most difficult range to be shooting at, but it is obviously more than like a 50 or 100 yard distance. So kind of keep that in mind when I talk about learning curve and how easy it is to use the ACOG. I could shoot much farther and have to take in more shooting concepts into consideration, but I have not done that yet, so just remember that. At 200 yards, obviously things get harder, but you're not necessarily factoring wind or elevation nearly as much as you would at greater distances. But the ACOG is designed with its reticle to be able to use to factor in those things. And third and finally, why you should consider the ACOG, there's the obvious elephant in the room. It looks great, and it's an iconic clone portion to the M16A4. And so, you know, every time you see, or almost every time you see the M16A4, what optic is on there? It's probably the ACOG. Yes, you have backup sights, you have carry handles, which I love shooting. But if you're talking about the optic to have on the M16A4, probably thinking of the TA31 ACOG. So from a clone perspective, obviously it's you know, it's great. I don't think not much needs to be said in this section of the video about it. It's iconic, it looks great, well respected, really rounds out that look if you're truly going for the M16A4 kind of clone look. So we've talked about the upsides, the durability and its well-designed construction, its relative ease of use to get used to, and of course the awesome clone factor as well about the scope. But let's also talk about some considerations or some downsides about using the ACOG. The first, of course, you know, should be no surprise, is the price. If you buy it new, when I got it 2 years ago from Optic, I paid all in with shipping, tax, all that good stuff. I paid $1,200. That is not cheap for an optic. Yes, there are definitely more expensive ones, but $1,200 is a lot of money. So price can be cost prohibitive. Now, my understanding is that you can actually buy used or aftermarket ACOGs for $800–900 or maybe even a little cheaper. I wanted to have something new for myself. It's just the pride of ownership, knowing I'm the only one who's owned it. It's brand spanking new. So I chose to do that. But you can also buy these aftermarket or secondhand for significantly less. The second thing also to keep in mind is the eye box or the eye relief on the ACOG is, you know, it's very little. You know, we've heard a lot, nose to charging handle. You have to keep your eyes or your nose very close to the scope. And so, you know, as long as you practice or, you know, practice with this, it's really not that big of a deal. But yeah, it does take me some getting used to be able to shoot with my eyes that close to the scope. Now, eventually this just becomes natural the more you shoot. And what you can do is you can just remove the iron sight or the rear backup sight and move your ACOG back closer to you on the rail. And honestly, that takes care of so much of the problem. But it's still another thing to consider if you do want to have backup irons for whatever practical purposes or because it looks cool for the clone stuff. Just keep in mind, you know, the eye box is not the most forgiving. It's not nearly as forgiving as something like a, you know, your typical red dot or holographic sight, or even just other magnified optics as well. I will also say this is not really a downside, but is more of a consideration, is that the ACOG is a fixed 4-power scope. Depending on your needs for what you're looking for in a scope, 4-power or a fixed power may or may not be your thing. So as cool as the scope is, you need to also keep in mind that you're signing up for a very specific magnification that you can't change unless you take the rifle off your, take the optic off your rifle. So just keep that in mind. For me, it works great. I love the 4-power magnification, but remember why you're buying this scope in the first place and let that tell you whether this is a scope you really should be getting. Another consideration I would also throw out there, which I wouldn't really call a downside, but the reticle being powered by its fiber optic cable in the sun, it can sometimes be a little too bright to the point where it blooms and makes it difficult to really kind of make out the edges of the chevron reticle. And at first glance, you might think, oh, it's great. It's really bright. There's a lot of contrast, which is what I initially thought. But it actually does get a little limiting if you want to make more precise shots than normal. But there's the very well-known technique of just putting a strip of electrical tape on top of the fiber optic wire, and that way it dims the reticle so you can, see your target and superimpose the reticle over the target that much better. So that's such a simple fix that I don't think it's a downside, but it's still a consideration. So that's a wrap on this video, guys. Again, it felt like a sin to talk about the M16A4, but not even really mention the ACOG. It should be illegal to do that. And so that's what this video is for. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you do have any questions about my experiences with the ACOG, definitely feel free to leave that in the comments, and I'm happy to address. I can also tell there are a lot of people who watch these videos that are much more familiar with the A4 and the ACOG than I am, so I'm sure if you leave a comment, someone will address it. But thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one.